Our cat at death's door knocked at the clinic, and what happened next shocked everyone. The rain fell steadily that cold morning in Millfield, Ohio, washing the streets clean and painting the small town in shades of gray. Water cascaded from rooftops and gathered in puddles that reflected the leaden sky. The scent of fresh bread wafted from Donovan's bakery, mingling with the resonant chime of bells from St. Matthew's Church that echoed across the square. Most townspeople had sought shelter from the downpour, leaving Main Street unusually quiet. In this somber silence, an unexpected figure appeared. A black cat, its fur matted and dull, emerged from between two buildings. The animal moved with painful deliberation, each step a visible struggle as it limped across the wet pavement. It passed the elementary school where an American flag hung limp against its pole, then continued past Donovan's bakery, where Martha Donovan was too busy kneading dough to notice the creature through her steamy windows. The cat paused several times, its thin body trembling with the effort of movement. Its ribs protruded sharply beneath its wet coat, and one of its hind legs dragged slightly as it walked. Despite its obvious distress, there was something purposeful about its journey, as though it knew exactly where it was heading. Finally, it stopped in front of a modest brick building with a simple sign that read, Millfield Veterinary Clinic. The cat sat there for a moment, gathering what little strength remained. Then, with what seemed like monumental effort, it raised a paw and tapped it against the glass door. Inside, Maribel Quinn was sorting through patient files at the reception desk. At 47, with curly brown hair streaked with silver and reading glasses perched on her nose, she had worked at the clinic for over 20 years. The quiet morning had given her a chance to catch up on paperwork while nursing her second cup of coffee. When the soft tapping sound reached her ears, she initially thought it was just another branch scraping against the window in the wind. But something made her look up. Through the glass door she saw the bedraggled creature looking directly at her. Their eyes met, hers widening in surprise, the cat's half-closed but somehow imploring. "Oh my goodness!" Maribel gasped, dropping her mug. Coffee splashed across the linoleum floor as she rushed to the door, her heart suddenly racing. The moment she pulled the door open, the cat made one final effort to step forward, then collapsed in a heap on the welcome mat. "Dr. Vey," Maribel called out, her voice tight with urgency. "Come quick." Dr. Harlan Vey emerged from the back room, his tall frame moving with the swift efficiency of someone accustomed to emergencies. At 62, he had the weathered face of a man who had spent years caring for both farm animals and pets in this rural community. His silver hair was cropped short, and his blue eyes sharpened with concern as he took in the scene. "Bring him to the examination room," he directed, already pulling on a pair of latex gloves. Maribel gently scooped up the frail body, surprised at how little the cat weighed. "He's barely more than bones," she whispered as she carried him through to the sterile examination room. The sharp smell of antiseptic filled the air as Dr. Vey cleared the metal table. Maribel placed the cat down as gently as she could, and together they began to work. Dr. Vey's hands moved with practiced precision as he checked for vital signs, while Maribel gathered clean towels to dry the sodden fur. "Is he?" Maribel couldn't finish the question, her throat tight with emotion. "He's alive," Dr. Vey confirmed, his stethoscope pressed against the cat's chest, but just barely. Severe dehydration, possible internal injuries, definitely malnourished. He looked up at Maribel, his expression grave. "I'm not sure he'll make it through the morning." As if in defiance of this assessment, the cat suddenly opened its eyes. They were a startling amber color, clear and alert despite the animal's dire condition. Those eyes fixed on Maribel with such intensity that she felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't just pain or fear she saw in that gaze. There was something else, something that seemed almost like determination. "I think he's trying to tell us something," she said softly. Dr. Vey, pragmatic as always, was already preparing an IV line. "Well, whatever it is, he'll need to stick around if he wants us to hear it. Let's get him stabilized first." As they worked to save the mysterious visitor, neither could have imagined how this bedraggled cat would soon change not only their lives, but the entire fabric of their small community. Nor could they have guessed the extraordinary journey that had brought him to their door on that rainy morning, or the even more remarkable journey that was about to begin. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the cat's paw prints from the sidewalk. The bells of St. Matthew's chimed once more, marking the hour, while inside the clinic, a silent battle for life had just begun. The first 24 hours were critical. Dr. Vey cancelled his afternoon appointments to focus on the black cat, whom they had temporarily started calling John Doe. The name felt impersonal for such a determined creature, but it would have to do for now. "I've seen animals in bad shape before," Dr. Vey told Maribel as they worked side by side into the evening, "but rarely one with such a will to live." The cat's condition was indeed dire. Beyond the obvious malnutrition and dehydration, he had an infected wound on his back leg, several broken ribs, and what appeared to be pneumonia developing in his lungs. The metallic scent of antiseptic mixed with the earthy smell of wet fur as they cleaned his wounds and administered antibiotics. "It's as if he's been through a war," Maribel observed, gently dabbing antiseptic on a cut above the cat's eye. Dr. Vey nodded grimly. "Or several. Some of these scars are old. He's been surviving on his own for quite some time." When Sarah Hendricks, the young veterinary assistant, arrived for the evening shift, she gasped at the sight of the frail animal. "Is that a new patient?" she asked, setting down her umbrella by the door. The rain outside had slowed to a gentle patter, tapping a steady rhythm against the clinic's roof. "You could say that," Dr. Vey replied, not looking up from his work. "He showed up at our doorstep this morning. Literally knocked to be let in." Sarah's eyes widened. "Knocked, you mean tapped on the glass with his paw?" Maribel confirmed. "I saw it myself. It wasn't an accident. He wanted in." The three of them worked well into the night, taking turns monitoring the cat's vital signs. They set up a small heating pad to help regulate his body temperature and carefully administered fluids to combat the dehydration. The soft beep of monitoring equipment provided a steady backdrop to their vigil. By morning, the rain had stopped, and weak sunlight filtered through the blinds of the recovery room. Dr. Vey, who had slept on the office couch, came in to check on their patient. To his surprise, the cat was awake, his amber eyes alert despite his weakened state. "Well, look who decided to stick around," he said quietly, checking the IV line. "You're quite the fighter, aren't you?" The cat blinked slowly in response, a gesture that seemed almost like acknowledgement. Maribel arrived an hour later, carrying a paper bag that smelled of cinnamon rolls from Donovan's bakery. "How's our guest doing?" she asked, setting down the bag and quickly washing her hands. "Better than expected," Dr. Vey admitted. "His vitals have stabilized, but we're not out of the woods yet. The most pressing concern now was getting the cat to eat." Despite their best efforts, he showed no interest in the soft cat food they offered. The smell of the food seemed to repel him, causing him to turn his head away or close his eyes. "Maybe he's just not ready for food yet," Sarah suggested, as they watched another attempt fail. But Dr. Vey shook his head. "He needs nutrition to heal. The IV fluids can only do so much." It was Maribel who had the breakthrough. That evening, as she was about to leave for home, she remembered something from her childhood. Her grandmother had once nursed a stray cat back to health after it had been hit by a car. Strays that have been on their own for a long time sometimes forget what proper cat food tastes like, her grandmother had explained. Sometimes you need to remind them what real food is. On her way home, Maribel stopped at the grocery store. The next morning, she arrived at the clinic with a small container of home-cooked chicken breast, plain and unseasoned. "It's worth a try," she told Dr. Vey, who looked skeptical but didn't object. The moment she opened the container near the cat, his nostrils flared. For the first time since his arrival, he lifted his head voluntarily. Maribel placed a small piece of chicken on her finger and held it close to his mouth. After a moment's hesitation, his rough tongue darted out and licked it. "That's it," she encouraged softly. "Just a little taste." The cat took the next piece directly from her fingers, chewing slowly but deliberately. Maribel's eyes filled with tears as she looked up at Dr. Vey, who was watching with undisguised amazement. "Well, I'll be damned," he murmured. "You've done it, Maribel." It was a small victory, but a significant one. That night, when Maribel finally went home to her empty apartment, she felt a sense of accomplishment that had been missing from her life for a long time. As she lay in bed, listening to the distant sound of a freight train passing through town, she found herself thinking about those amber eyes and wondering what stories they could tell if only they could speak. Meanwhile, back at the clinic, the cat slept peacefully for the first time, his breathing deeper and more regular. Outside, the stars appeared between parting clouds, shining down on the small town of Millfield, where word was already beginning to spread about the mysterious black cat who had knocked on the veterinary clinic's door. In homes across town, people were sharing the story over dinner tables and telephone calls. "Did you hear about the cat at Dr. Vey's place?" they asked one another. "They say he showed up out of nowhere, half dead, and knocked to be let in." Can you imagine? None of them could have imagined what would happen next, how this single act of survival would ripple through their community, challenging perceptions and changing hearts. But that was still to come. For now, the cat slept, gathering strength for the journey ahead. By the end of the first week, the black cat had become something of a local curiosity. People who had appointments at the clinic would ask to see him, and Maribel found herself fielding calls from townspeople who had heard the story and wanted updates on his condition. "We should give him a proper name," Sarah suggested one morning as she changed the bandage on the cat's leg. "John Doe is so impersonal." Dr. Vey, who was updating the cat's chart, shrugged. "He's not exactly a pet, Sarah. We're just treating him until he recovers." But Maribel, who had been spending her lunch breaks sitting with the cat and reading aloud from whatever novel she was currently enjoying, had been thinking the same thing. "What about Ashen?" she suggested. "Because of his coat, it's not quite black, more like a dark grey, like ashes." The cat, who had been dozing on his blanket, opened his eyes at the sound of the name, his ears perking up slightly. "I think he likes it," Sarah said with a smile. Dr. Vey looked up from his paperwork. "Ashen it is then," he conceded. "At least it'll make the paperwork less confusing." The name spread quickly through town, and soon Ashen was the talk of Millfield. Most people found the story heartwarming, a testament to both animal intelligence and human compassion. But not everyone was so supportive. "I don't see why they're spending so much time and money on a stray cat," Frank Willis complained as he sat at his usual table at the Millfield diner. "When my cow got sick last spring, Vey told me he couldn't do anything more for her." "That's different, Frank," Martha Donovan replied as she refilled his coffee cup. "Your cow was already half dead when you called him. Besides, the cat came to them for help. How could they turn him away?" The bell above the diner door jingled as Chlorine Dawes entered, shaking the chill from her coat. At 78, Chlorine was one of the oldest residents of Millfield, a widow who lived alone in a small house on Maple Street. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and despite her age, she moved with the vigor of someone much younger. "Morning, Martha," she called, settling into her usual booth by the window. "Is that a fresh apple pie I smell?" "Just came out of the oven," Martha confirmed, bringing over a slice without being asked. The sweet aroma of cinnamon and baked apples wafted through the diner, mingling with the rich scent of coffee. "I hear you've been visiting that cat at the clinic," Frank said to Chlorine, his tone somewhere between curious and disapproving. Chlorine nodded as she took a bite of pie. "Every afternoon," she confirmed after swallowing. "Remarkable creature. I think I've seen him before, you know." This caught everyone's attention. The diner grew quieter as people leaned in to listen. "Where?" Martha asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "On my porch," Chlorine replied matter-of-factly. "About a month ago. I'd see him sitting there in the evenings just watching my house. Never came close enough for me to pet him, but he'd stay for hours, especially when I had the lights on in the front room. It was like he was keeping an eye on me." A thoughtful silence followed this revelation. Even Frank seemed to be reconsidering his position. "You think he chose the clinic on purpose?" Martha finally asked. "Like he knew they could help him?" Chlorine shrugged. "Who knows what goes on in animals' minds? But I do know this. That cat has more sense than some people I could name." She glanced meaningfully at Frank, who had the grace to look abashed. Back at the clinic, Ashen's recovery was progressing slowly but steadily. His wounds were healing, and he had gained enough strength to sit up and observe the comings and goings of the staff. He still showed little interest in commercial cat food, but eagerly accepted the chicken and occasional bits of fish that Maribel brought for him. Dr. Vey, despite his initial professional detachment, found himself growing fond of their unusual patient. "He watches everything," he remarked to Maribel one afternoon. "Most cats I've treated are either scared or indifferent, but he's different. It's like he's studying us." Maribel had noticed the same thing. "I talk to him when I'm here alone," she admitted. "Sometimes I swear he understands every word." It was around this time that the first challenges to their care of Ashen began to surface. Gary Peterson, the head of the local health department, stopped by the clinic unannounced one Tuesday morning. The smell of his cologne, something expensive and overpowering, filled the waiting room as he asked pointed questions about the resources being devoted to a single stray animal. "We've had some concerns expressed," he explained to Dr. Vey, his tone professionally neutral but his eyes cold, "about prioritization of care." Dr. Vey, standing tall in his white coat, didn't back down. "Every patient that comes through that door gets the care they need, Mr. Peterson. That's been my policy for 30 years, and it's not changing now." Peterson left without pressing the issue further, but the encounter left a sour taste in everyone's mouth. That evening, as Maribel was preparing to leave, she paused by Ashen's enclosure. "Don't you worry," she told him, gently stroking his head. "We're not giving up on you." Ashen blinked slowly at her, then did something he hadn't done before. He leaned into her touch, pressing his head against her hand. The simple gesture of trust brought tears to Maribel's eyes. As she drove home that night, the streets of Millfield dark except for the occasional glow of porch lights and street lamps, Maribel couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in just a short time. A week ago, Ashen had been a nameless stray fighting for his life. Now he was becoming a symbol of something larger, though what exactly she couldn't yet say. What she didn't know was that the next day would bring an event that would transform Ashen from a local curiosity into something much more significant for the town of Millfield. And it would all begin with a chance encounter at the weekly farmers' market, where the scent of apple cider and pumpkin bread would mingle with the crisp autumn air, and where a small boy named Neril Finn was about to meet a very special cat. The Millfield farmers' market was a tradition that stretched back generations. Every Wednesday, rain or shine, local farmers and artisans would set up their stalls in the town square, transforming the space into a vibrant tapestry of colors, scents, and sounds. The October air was crisp that morning, carrying the distinctive aroma of fallen leaves and wood smoke from nearby chimneys. Maribel had suggested bringing Ashen to the market. "It might be good for him to get some fresh air," she had told Dr. Vey, "and people are asking about him. It could be good for the clinic too." Though initially reluctant, Dr. Vey had eventually agreed. Just for an hour, he'd stipulated, and he stays in the carrier the whole time. So it was that Ashen found himself at the farmer's market, secured in a pet carrier that had been lined with soft blankets and placed on a table at the small booth the clinic had set up. Dr. Vey had printed some informational brochures about pet care, and Sarah had made a sign that read, "Meet Ashen, the cat who knocked." The response was immediate. People gathered around, eager to see the cat they'd heard so much about. Ashen, for his part, seemed remarkably composed for an animal that had spent who knows how long as a stray. He sat calmly in his carrier, those amber eyes taking in everything around him. "He doesn't look like much," one farmer commented, peering through the carrier door. "Hard to believe he's caused such a stir." "It's not about how he looks," Maribel replied gently. "It's about what he did. He asked for help when he needed it. There's a lesson in that for all of us, I think." The farmer nodded thoughtfully and moved on, making way for others who wanted to see the now famous feline. Among those who approached the booth was Eliza Finn, holding the hand of her 8-year-old son, Neril. The boy walked with a slight limp, the result of a congenital condition that affected his left leg. Despite this challenge, Neril was known throughout Millfield for his sunny disposition and curious nature. "Is that him?" Neril asked excitedly, his eyes wide as he looked at the carrier. "The cat who knocked on the door." "That's him," Maribel confirmed with a smile. "His name is Ashen. Can I see him closer?" the boy asked, his voice eager. Eliza looked uncertain. "I don't know, honey. He might be scared with so many people around." But Maribel, who had been watching Ashen's reactions carefully all morning, shook her head. "It's okay," she assured Eliza. "He's been very calm. You can come a little closer if you'd like, Neril." The boy approached slowly, his limp more pronounced as he concentrated on moving carefully. When he reached the table, he stood on tiptoe to get a better view into the carrier. Ashen, who had been sitting with his paws tucked beneath him, moved forward, his nose almost touching the carrier door. "Hi, Ashen," Neril said softly. "I'm Neril. I heard you were very brave." What happened next would be recounted throughout Millfield for weeks to come. Ashen extended his paw through the bars of the carrier door and gently touched Neril's hand, which was resting on the edge of the table. It wasn't a swipe or an accidental movement. It was deliberate, almost like a handshake. A collective gasp went up from those watching. Eliza's hand flew to her mouth, and even Dr. Vey, who had been engaged in conversation with another visitor, turned to look. Neril's face broke into a radiant smile. "He likes me," he exclaimed, looking up at his mother with joy. The moment was captured by Martha Donovan, who had been taking photos for the community newsletter. The image, a small boy with a limp and a recovering stray cat reaching out to touch each other, would soon become a powerful symbol for the town. As the crowd dispersed and Neril reluctantly said goodbye to his new friend, the atmosphere at the clinic's booth had changed. There was a palpable sense that something significant had occurred, though no one could quite articulate what it was. "I've never seen anything like it," Sarah whispered to Maribel as they packed up later. "It's like he knew that boy needed something." Maribel nodded, watching as Dr. Vey carefully placed Ashen's carrier in the back of his car. "I think they both did," she replied softly. The drive back to the clinic was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. The market had been a success by any measure. They had distributed all their brochures and collected several donations for the clinic, but the interaction between Ashen and Gnarl had overshadowed everything else. That evening, as Maribel was checking on Ashen before leaving for the day, she found him sitting alert in his enclosure, his amber eyes fixed on the window where the last rays of sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. "You made quite an impression today," she told him, refreshing his water bowl. "But you've started something bigger than any of us expected. People are asking why we're doing so much for you." Ashen turned to look at her, and in the fading light, his eyes seemed to hold a wisdom that transcended his feline nature. "The truth is," Maribel continued, speaking more to herself than to the cat, "I'm not entirely sure myself. All I know is that it feels right." As she left the clinic, locking the door behind her, she didn't notice the figure watching from across the street, Gary Peterson, standing in the shadow of an oak tree, his expression unreadable as he observed the darkened building. The debate about Ashen was about to escalate, bringing both challenges and unexpected alliances. But for now, in the quiet of the clinic, a cat who had once been at death's door slept peacefully, unaware of the controversy swirling around him or the impact he was having on the hearts and minds of an entire community. The real test, however, was yet to come. The photograph of Ashen touching Gnarl's hand appeared on the front page of the Millfield Gazette the following Monday. The headline read, "A Touch of Hope, the Story of Ashen and Gnarl." Martha Donovan's article detailed the unlikely connection between the stray cat and the young boy, quoting Eliza Finn as saying, "For a moment, it was like they understood each other perfectly." The story spread quickly beyond Millfield's borders, picked up by regional news outlets and shared across social media platforms. Suddenly, the small veterinary clinic found itself in the spotlight, fielding calls from reporters and receiving emails from animal lovers as far away as California. Not all the attention was positive, however. The increased focus on Ashen's care brought scrutiny of the clinic's resources and priorities. Letters to the editor began appearing in the Gazette, questioning whether so much effort should be expended on a single stray cat when there were other community needs. "I think it's gone too far," Frank Willis argued during the monthly town council meeting, his voice echoing in the wood-paneled chamber of the town hall. "We've got people in this town who can't afford their medications, and we're worried about a cat." Seated at the back of the room, Maribel felt her cheeks burn with indignation. She had come to the meeting out of curiosity, not expecting Ashen to be on the agenda. Now she found herself clenching her fists as the debate continued. "It's not an either-or situation, Frank," Mayor Eleanor Thompson replied calmly. "The care being provided to this animal is not taking away from human services. It's about priorities," Gary Peterson interjected, standing to address the room. The fluorescent lights gleamed off his polished shoes as he moved to the front. "The clinic has limited resources. Every hour spent on this stray is an hour not spent on someone's family, pet or livestock." Before Maribel could decide whether to speak up, Chlorine Dawes rose from her seat, her movements deliberate but determined. The room quieted as she made her way to the microphone, the tap of her cane against the wooden floor the only sound. "I've lived in Millfield for 78 years, she began, her voice strong despite her age. "I've seen this town through floods, droughts and economic downturns, and in all that time the thing that has always made Millfield special is how we care for each other." She paused, looking directly at Gary Peterson. "That cat came to us for help. He knocked on our door. In my book, that makes him one of us, and we don't turn our backs on our own." A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. Mayor Thompson nodded appreciatively at Chlorine, who made her way back to her seat with dignity and tact. "I think Mrs. Dawes has made an excellent point," the mayor concluded. "Unless there's evidence that the clinic's standard of care for other patients has declined, I see no reason for the town council to get involved in this matter." As the meeting adjourned, Maribel hurried to catch up with Chlorine. "Thank you for speaking up," she said, falling into step beside the older woman as they exited the town hall. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of burning leaves from a nearby yard. Chlorine smiled, her face a map of fine lines that deepened with the expression. "I meant every word," she said. "Besides, that cat and I have a connection. I told you I used to see him on my porch. There's something special about him, mark my words." The following day, Dr. Vey called a staff meeting before the clinic opened. The usually tidy break room was crowded as all 5 employees gathered around the small table. The smell of fresh coffee mingled with the lingering scent of antiseptic that never quite left the building. "I want to be transparent with all of you," Dr. Vey began, his expression serious. "The attention Ashen has brought to the clinic has been mostly positive, but it's also creating some financial strain. His ongoing treatment, special diet and the extra hours we're all putting in, it's adding up." Sarah glanced at Maribel, concern evident in her eyes. "Are we in trouble?" she asked. Dr. Vey shook his head. "Not yet, but if we continue at this rate, we might have to make some difficult decisions. I wanted you all to be aware." "What about the donations?" Maribel asked. People had been dropping off money at the clinic specifically for Ashen's care, though the amounts were modest. "They help," Dr. Vey acknowledged, "but they don't cover everything. I'm not saying we're going to stop caring for him," he added quickly, seeing the alarm on Maribel's face. "Just that we need to be mindful of the costs." As they prepared to open for the day, Maribel found herself troubled by the conversation. She had known, of course, that Ashen's care wasn't free, but she hadn't fully considered the financial implications for the clinic. Dr. Vey ran a good business, but like many small-town veterinary practices, margins were tight. The bell above the door chimed as their first appointment arrived. Mrs. Henderson, with her elderly beagle, Rusty. The familiar routine of the day began, but Maribel's thoughts kept returning to the problem at hand. That evening, as she sat beside Ashen's enclosure, reading aloud from To Kill a Mockingbird, as had become her custom, an idea began to form. Setting the book aside, she looked at the cat, who was watching her with those attentive amber eyes. "What do you think about a fundraiser?" she asked him. "Something to help cover your expenses and maybe even benefit other animals in need." Ashen blinked slowly, which Maribel had come to interpret as a sign of contentment or agreement. "I'll take that as a yes," she said with a smile, already making mental notes. "We just need to figure out what kind of event would work in a town like Millfield." The answer came the next day, from an unexpected source. Eliza Finn stopped by the clinic with Neril, who had begged to visit Ashen again. As the boy sat chatting animatedly to the cat, who seemed genuinely interested in what the child had to say, Eliza mentioned that the church was looking for fundraising ideas for their annual autumn event. "Usually we do a bake sale," she explained to Maribel, "but Pastor Williams wants to try something different this year." Maribel's eyes lit up. "What about a community auction? People could donate items or services, and all proceeds could be split between the church and a fund for animals in need, starting with Ashen." Eliza considered the idea. "That could work," she said slowly, "especially with all the attention Ashen's been getting. People might be more willing to participate if they know it's helping him." Within days, plans for the Paws for a Cause auction were underway. Pastor Williams, a kind-hearted man with a practical streak, readily agreed to the partnership, seeing it as an opportunity to bring the community together while addressing the controversy that had been brewing. The response from the townspeople was overwhelmingly positive. Donations began pouring in: handmade quilts, jars of preserves, offers of services like babysitting or lawn care. Martha Donovan promised a year's supply of cinnamon rolls from her bakery. Even Frank Willis, despite his earlier objections, contributed a cord of seasoned firewood. The auction was scheduled for the third Saturday in October, to be held in the church fellowship hall. As the day approached, excitement built throughout Millfield. Posters appeared in shop windows, and announcements were made on the local radio station. It seemed that whatever division had existed over Ashen's care was being replaced by a sense of common purpose. On the morning of the auction, Maribel arrived at the church early to help with setup. The fellowship hall smelled of pine cleaner and the cinnamon-spiced cider that was warming in a large pot in the kitchen. Wooden chairs scraped against the floor as volunteers arranged them in rows, and tables around the perimeter of the room were quickly filling with donated items. "This is quite a turnout," Pastor Williams commented as he helped Maribel hang a banner above the podium. "I haven't seen the community this engaged since we raised funds for the new playground." Maribel smiled, looking around at the bustling activity. "It's amazing what can bring people together." "Or who," the pastor corrected gently, nodding toward the entrance where Dr. Vey was arriving with Ashen in his carrier. The auction was a tremendous success. Under the warm glow of the church's vintage chandeliers, residents of Millfield bid enthusiastically on everything from Mrs. Thompson's famous apple pies to a weekend stay at the Johnson's Lake House. The atmosphere was festive, with laughter and friendly competition filling the air. Ashen, who had been given a place of honor near the podium, observed the proceedings with his usual calm attention. Children stopped by to greet him, and even those who had been skeptical about his care seemed to soften when they saw him in person. By the end of the evening, the auction had raised over $3,000, far more than anyone had expected. As Maribel helped count the money in the church office, the reality of what they had accomplished began to sink in. "This will cover Ashen's care for months," she told Dr. Vey, who was sitting across from her, looking both pleased and slightly stunned by the outcome. "And we'll be able to help other animals too," he added. "Maybe set up a fund for cases where the owners can't afford treatment." As they prepared to leave, Maribel paused to thank Pastor Williams. "I still can't believe how generous everyone was," she said, shaking his hand. The pastor smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "People gave up things they valued because they believed in something larger than themselves," he said. "That's what community is all about." Driving home through the quiet streets of Millfield, Ashen secure in his carrier in the passenger seat, Maribel reflected on those words. What had started as an act of compassion for a single animal had somehow tapped into something deeper in the town's collective consciousness, a reminder of who they were and what they valued most. She couldn't have known then that this was just the beginning, or that their resolve would soon be tested in ways none of them could have anticipated. For just as Ashen was beginning to truly heal, nature was about to throw a challenge their way that would push their resources and their unity to the breaking point. The storm arrived without warning on a Tuesday evening in late October. The day had started like any other, crisp and clear with just a hint of the winter to come, but by mid-afternoon, dark clouds had begun gathering on the western horizon. By the time Maribel left the clinic at 6, the wind was picking up, bending the trees along Main Street and sending fallen leaves skittering across the pavement. "Looks like we're in for a rough night," Dr. Vey observed as he locked the clinic door behind them. "You'd better get home before it hits." Maribel glanced at the threatening sky. "What about Ashen? He'll be fine," Dr. Vey assured her. "The clinic has a backup generator if we lose power. I'll check on him later tonight." She nodded, but something made her hesitate as she turned toward her car. "Maybe I should take him home with me just for tonight." Dr. Vey considered this, then shook his head. "He's still recovering. Better to keep him where all his medications and supplies are." "Really, Maribel, don't worry. I'll drive by around 9 to make sure everything's okay." Reluctantly, she agreed and headed home. The first fat raindrops began to fall as she pulled into her driveway, and by the time she had unlocked her front door, the sky had opened up completely. Thunder rumbled in the distance as she stepped inside, the comforting scent of her home, a mixture of lavender air freshener and the faint aroma of the morning's coffee welcoming her. The storm intensified as the evening wore on. Maribel tried to focus on a mystery novel, but the howling wind and crashing thunder made it difficult to concentrate. At 8:30, the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out entirely. "Great," she muttered, reaching for her phone to use as a flashlight. She was about to call Dr. Vey when her phone rang, his name appearing on the screen. "I was just about to call you," she said by way of greeting. "My power's out." "Same here," he replied, his voice slightly distorted by static. "And at the clinic too. I'm headed there now. The generator should have kicked in automatically, but I want to make sure." "I'll meet you there," Maribel said immediately. "There's no need," Dr. Vey began, but she cut him off. "I'll feel better if I check on Ashen myself. See you in 10 minutes. The drive to the clinic was treacherous. Rain lashed against her windshield faster than the wipers could clear it, and twice she had to swerve to avoid branches that had fallen onto the road. The town was completely dark, the usual warm glow of porch lights and street lamps extinguished by the power outage. When she finally reached the clinic, she was alarmed to see that it too was dark. Dr. Vey's truck was already in the parking lot, and she could make out his silhouette at the front door, illuminated briefly by a flash of lightning. "The generator didn't start," he explained as she rushed to join him, her coat already soaked through from the short dash from her car. "I've tried the manual override, but nothing's happening." Inside, the clinic was eerily quiet without the usual hum of equipment. Dr. Vey's flashlight beam swept across the reception area as they made their way to the back room where Ashen was kept. "He's probably scared," Maribel said, her voice tight with concern. Cats are sensitive to storms. But when they reached Ashen's enclosure, they found him sitting calmly, his amber eyes reflecting the flashlight beam. If the storm bothered him, he showed no sign of it. "Well, he's not panicking," Dr. Vey observed, visibly relieved, "but we still have a problem. Without power, we can't maintain the proper temperature in here, and some of his medications need refrigeration." Maribel thought quickly. "What about hot water bottles? We could fill them from the tap. The water heater should still have some hot water in it, and use them to keep his area warm. Dr. Vey nodded. Good thinking, and I have a cooler in my truck. We can fill it with ice from the freezer before it all melts and use it for the medications. They worked swiftly, guided by flashlights and the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the room through the windows. The wind howled outside, and rain pounded against the roof with a sound like marching feet. I'm going to call Sarah and see if she can come in, Dr. Vey said, as they finished setting up the makeshift heating system around Ashen's enclosure. We might need to take shifts through the night. But when he tried his phone, he found there was no signal. The storm had knocked out the cell towers as well. Looks like it's just us, he told Maribel. I can stay if you want to try to get home. She shook her head firmly. I'm not leaving him. She looked down at Ashen, who was watching them with those inscrutable eyes. Besides, the roads are getting worse. It's probably safer to wait it out here. So they settled in for a long night. Dr. Vey found some emergency candles in a supply closet, and their flickering light cast long shadows on the walls. The rain continued unabated, a constant backdrop to their vigil. Around midnight, Maribel noticed that Ashen was shivering slightly despite the hot water bottles. The water's cooling off, she said, touching one of the bottles. We need to refill them. As Dr. Vey went to heat more water on the gas-powered camping stove he kept for emergencies, Maribel wrapped Ashen in an extra blanket. Hang in there, she murmured. We're not going to let anything happen to you. The cat looked up at her, and then, to her surprise, began to purr. It was the first time he had made this sound since arriving at the clinic, and the gentle rumble seemed to fill the dark room with unexpected warmth. Did you hear that? She called to Dr. Vey, who was returning with the refilled hot water bottles. He nodded, a rare smile crossing his face. Sounds like a thank you to me. They continued their routine through the night, refilling hot water bottles every few hours and checking on Ashen's condition. Around 3 in the morning, the storm began to subside, the thunder moving off into the distance and the rain softening to a gentle patter. Exhausted, Maribel dozed off in a chair beside Ashen's enclosure, waking with a start when the first grey light of dawn filtered through the windows. Dr. Vey was asleep at his desk, his head resting on his folded arms. Outside, the world had been transformed. Branches littered the parking lot, and a large oak tree had fallen across the street, its massive roots exposed like a tangle of wooden snakes. But the clinic had survived intact, and so had Ashen. When Sarah arrived at 7, having picked her way through debris-strewn streets, she was amazed to find them there. You stayed all night? She asked, taking in their disheveled appearance. We couldn't leave him, Maribel explained simply, gesturing to Ashen, who was now sleeping peacefully, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Sarah's eyes widened as she looked around at the makeshift heating system and the nearly depleted candles. You did all this for a cat? Dr. Vey, stretching to relieve his stiff muscles, nodded. Not just any cat, he corrected her. For Ashen. The power remained out for 2 more days. News slowly filtered in about the extent of the storm's damage. Flooded basements, roofs torn off, even a few injuries from falling debris. But Millfield had weathered worse, and the community quickly mobilized to help with cleanup and repairs. What surprised many was the number of people who stopped by the clinic to check on Ashen. Some brought blankets or cat food, others simply wanted to see for themselves that he was okay. Even Frank Willis showed up, awkwardly offering a small generator just until the power comes back on. I still think it's crazy, all this fuss over a cat, he grumbled to Dr. Vey. But my grandkids wouldn't stop asking about him, so here I am. The generator allowed them to run essential equipment, making Ashen's care much easier. When the power was finally restored on Thursday evening, a small cheer went up from the staff who had been working by flashlight and candlelight for days. That night, as Maribel prepared to go home to a hot shower and her own bed for the first time since the storm hit, she paused to say goodnight to Ashen. He was curled up on his blanket, but lifted his head when she approached, those amber eyes fixing on her face. You're quite the survivor, aren't you? She said softly, reaching in to stroke his head. First whatever happened to bring you to our door, and now this. Ashen leaned into her touch, his purr now familiar and comforting. You know, she continued, when you first arrived I thought we were saving you. But I'm starting to wonder if it isn't the other way around. As she drove home through the battered but resilient town, past neighbors helping each other clear debris and repair damage, Maribel reflected on how Ashen had become a focal point for the community's better nature. People who might never have spoken to each other were now working side by side, connected by their concern for a single stray cat who had knocked on a door seeking help. What she couldn't know was that Ashen's greatest test, and perhaps his greatest gift to Millfield, was still to come. For even as the town recovered from the storm, another kind of tempest was brewing, one that would challenge not just their resources, but the very heart of their newfound unity. November arrived with a biting chill that turned breath to vapor and frosted the windows of shops along Main Street. The storm damage had been mostly repaired, and Millfield was settling back into its normal rhythm, though conversations still often turned to the night when darkness had fallen so completely on the town. Ashen's recovery continued steadily. His wounds had healed, leaving only faint scars beneath his now glossy black fur, and he had gained enough weight that his ribs no longer showed prominently. Dr. Vey had moved him from the intensive care enclosure to a larger space in the clinic's front room, where he could observe the comings and goings of staff and visitors. "I think he's ready for adoption," Dr. Vey told Maribel one quiet afternoon as they watched Ashen grooming himself, his movements now fluid and graceful where they had once been halting and painful. Maribel felt an unexpected pang at the thought. "So soon?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. Dr. Vey gave her a knowing look. "It's been almost 2 months, Maribel. He's healthy now, and with all the attention he's gotten, finding him a good home shouldn't be difficult." She nodded, knowing he was right. Ashen had never been meant to be a permanent resident of the clinic. The goal had always been to heal him and find him a loving home. Still, the thought of saying goodbye to the cat, who had become such an important part of her life, and the life of the entire town, was harder than she had anticipated. "I'll put together an adoption flyer," she said, turning away so Dr. Vey wouldn't see the moisture in her eyes. The news that Ashen was available for adoption spread quickly through Millfield. Several families expressed interest, including the Finns, though Eliza was concerned about how their elderly dog would react to a new feline housemate. It was on a bright but cold Tuesday morning that the stranger arrived. The bell above the clinic door chimed as a man entered, stamping snow from his boots on the welcome mat. He was tall and well-dressed, in an expensive-looking overcoat, with silver-streaked dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard. The scent of an unfamiliar cologne, something woodsy and expensive, preceded him. "Good morning," Maribel greeted him from behind the reception desk. "How can I help you?" "I'm here about the cat," the man replied, his voice carrying a slight accent that Maribel couldn't quite place. "Ashen, I believe he's called. I understand he's available for adoption." Something in his tone made Maribel instantly wary, though she couldn't have explained why. "Yes, he is," she confirmed, her smile feeling forced. "Are you from Millfield? I don't believe we've met." "James Harker," the man said, extending a hand. His grip was firm but cold. "I'm from Columbus originally, but I have a country house not far from here. I read about Ashen in the regional paper and was quite touched by his story." Maribel nodded, trying to place why the name sounded familiar. "Well, Mr. Harker, we do have an application process for adoptions. Would you like to fill out a form?" "Of course," he agreed smoothly. "And I'd like to meet him as well, if that's possible." Maribel hesitated, then nodded. "He's right over here." She led him to where Ashen was perched on a cat tree near the window, basking in a patch of winter sunlight. At their approach, Ashen turned his head, those amber eyes assessing the newcomer with their usual penetrating gaze. "Remarkable," Harker murmured, reaching out a hand toward the cat. "Such an intelligent face." What happened next was so unexpected that Maribel gasped out loud. Ashen, who had grown comfortable with most visitors and even seemed to enjoy attention, suddenly arched his back, his fur standing on end. A low, warning growl emerged from his throat as he backed away from Harker's outstretched hand. "I'm so sorry," Maribel apologized, genuinely shocked by the reaction. "He's usually very friendly. I don't know what's gotten into him." Harker withdrew his hand, his expression unreadable. "No need to apologize. Animals have their instincts. Perhaps he senses that I'm a stranger." But there was something in the way he looked at Ashen, a flash of what might have been recognition quickly masked, that sent a chill down Maribel's spine. "Let me get you that application," she said, eager to put some distance between them. "You can take it with you and bring it back when it's completed." As she turned to go to the desk, she heard Harker speak softly, almost under his breath. "We'll see each other again, old friend." The words were so quiet that later she would wonder if she had imagined them, but the effect on Ashen was undeniable. His growl deepened, and he flattened himself against the wall of the cat tree, as far from Harker as he could get. After Harker left, application in hand, Maribel immediately went to Dr. Vey's office. "There's something not right about that man," she told him, describing what had happened. Dr. Vey frowned. It's unusual for Ashen to react that way, he agreed. But we can't reject someone as an adopter just because the cat seemed nervous around them once. Let's see if he returns the application, and then we can schedule a follow-up visit. Maribel knew he was being reasonable, but she couldn't shake her unease. That night, she found herself researching James Harker online. What she discovered made her blood run cold. James Harker was a wealthy real estate developer whose company had been investigated multiple times for animal cruelty. Several years ago, a property he owned had been raided by animal control officers who found dozens of cats in deplorable conditions, an illegal breeding operation that had been set up by one of his tenants, though Harker had denied any knowledge of it. The next morning, she brought her findings to Dr. Vey. The clinic was quiet, with no appointments scheduled until afternoon, and the only sound was the gentle hum of the heating system, pushing warm air through the vents. I knew I recognized his name, she concluded after showing him the newspaper articles she had printed out. He might not have been directly responsible for what happened to those cats, but the fact that Ashen reacted so strongly to him. Dr. Vey, what if Ashen was one of those cats? What if he somehow escaped from that place? Dr. Vey leaned back in his chair, his expression troubled. That's a serious accusation, Maribel. The raid was in Columbus, over 50 miles from here. It's a stretch to think Ashen could have made that journey. But not impossible, she insisted. Cats have been known to travel hundreds of miles to find their way home. What if he was trying to get away from something, or someone? Before Dr. Vey could respond, the clinic door opened and Sarah called out, Dr. Vey, Maribel, you need to come see this. They hurried to the front room to find Chlorine Dawes standing there, her face pale despite the cold that had reddened her cheeks. It's about that man who was here yesterday, she said without preamble. James Harker. How did you know about him? Maribel asked, surprised. Martha Donovan saw him leaving the clinic and recognized him, Chlorine explained. She called me right away because she knew I'd want to know. She took a deep breath. 5 years ago, that man tried to buy my house, said he was acquiring properties for some kind of development. When I refused to sell, things started happening. My mailbox was vandalized. I got strange phone calls in the middle of the night. Nothing that could be traced back to him, of course, but it stopped when he finally gave up and moved on to another area. Dr. Vey and Maribel exchanged glances. And you think this connects to Ashen somehow? Dr. Vey asked, his skepticism evident. I told you I used to see that cat on my porch, Chlorine reminded them. What if he wasn't just some random stray? What if he was watching over me? Her voice dropped to a near whisper. What if he knew? The idea seemed far-fetched, even fantastical, but Maribel couldn't dismiss it entirely. Ashen had shown remarkable intelligence and awareness from the beginning, and his reaction to Harker had been unmistakable. What do we do? She asked Dr. Vey. We can't give Ashen to him, not if there's any chance he might have been involved in his past suffering. Dr. Vey sighed, rubbing his forehead. We don't have proof of anything, Maribel, just suspicions and coincidences. Legally, if Harker's application is in order and there are no red flags, we don't have grounds to refuse him. Then we need to find proof, Maribel said firmly, or at least enough reason to justify declining his application. The next few days were tense. Maribel found herself watching for Harker's car every time she arrived at or left the clinic. She also began spending even more time with Ashen, as if her presence could somehow protect him from whatever threat might be looming. On Friday afternoon, just as they were preparing to close for the day, the clinic door opened and James Harker walked in, snow dusting the shoulders of his expensive coat. He carried a manila envelope in one gloved hand. My completed application, he announced, handing it to Maribel with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I believe you'll find everything in order. Maribel accepted the envelope, struggling to maintain a professional demeanor. Thank you, Mr. Harker. We'll review it and get back to you. I was hoping to see the cat again, he said, looking past her to where Ashen's cat tree stood. But Ashen wasn't there. He had retreated to his enclosure in the back room as soon as the bell above the door had chimed. I'm afraid he's not feeling social today, Maribel said, the lie coming easily to her lips. Perhaps another time. Harker's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. I look forward to hearing from you soon. He turned to leave, then paused. By the way, I happened to run into Gary Peterson yesterday. He mentioned that the clinic has been under some financial strain lately. Perhaps I could make a donation. I'd be happy to write a check right now. The offer, though seemingly generous, felt like a threat somehow. That's very kind, Maribel replied carefully, but any donations should go through our proper channels. There's information on our website. After he left, she locked the door behind him with shaking hands. The application felt like a ticking bomb in her grasp. Later that evening, as she and Dr. Vey reviewed the paperwork in his office, their worst fears were confirmed. On paper, Harker looked like a perfect adopter. Stable income, spacious home, experience with cats. There was nothing they could point to as a legitimate reason for rejection. We could delay, Dr. Vey suggested. Say we have other applications to consider. For how long? Maribel asked. He knows we're stalling, and if he's as determined as I think he is, he won't give up easily. They sat in troubled silence, the only sound the ticking of the wall clock and the occasional rustle as one of them turned a page of the application. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, thick flakes illuminated by the street lamps. There's one thing we could do, Dr. Vey said finally, his voice heavy, but it would mean breaking a lot of rules. Maribel looked up, hope flickering to life. What? We could hide him, Dr. Vey said simply. Get him out of the clinic someplace Harker wouldn't think to look, just until we can figure out what's really going on here. It was a drastic step, potentially risking their professional reputations and even legal consequences. But as they looked at each other across the desk, both knew it was the only option they could live with. Where would we take him? Maribel asked. Dr. Vey considered for a moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. I think I know just the place and the person who could help us. As they formulated their plan, snow continued to fall outside, covering Millfield in a blanket of white that muffled sounds and obscured footprints. Within this transforming landscape, a small group of people were about to take a stand to protect one of their own, proving once again that in Millfield, the bonds of community ran deeper than anyone might have suspected. And at the center of it all was Ashen, a cat who had once been at death's door but who now stood at the threshold of yet another transformation, one that would reveal his true past and perhaps, finally, secure his future. The plan came together quickly in hushed conversations behind closed doors. By Saturday morning, a small network of trusted allies had been assembled, each with a role to play in what they had begun calling Operation Sanctuary. The name had been Narul's suggestion, offered with the earnest gravity that only an 8-year-old could muster when included in adult secrets. Where exactly are we taking him? Maribel asked, as she helped Dr. Vey prepare Ashen for transport. The cat watched them calmly from his carrier, seemingly untroubled by the nervous energy surrounding him. My sister has a cabin about 30 miles north of here, Dr. Vey explained, checking that Ashen's medications were properly labeled and packed. It's isolated, hard to find unless you know where to look. She only uses it in the summer, so it's empty now, but it has heat and running water. She's agreed to let us use it. Maribel nodded, relief washing over her. And who's going to stay with him? Dr. Vey hesitated. That's the complicated part. I can't leave the clinic for more than a day or two without raising suspicions. You're too visible as well. Harker's probably watching both of us. We need someone who can disappear for a while without anyone asking questions. I'll do it, came a voice from the doorway. They turned to see Chlorine Dawes standing there, her silver hair neatly pinned back, a determined expression on her face. I already told my neighbors I'm visiting my niece in Cincinnati for a couple of weeks. No one will think twice about it. Maribel stared at her in surprise. Chlorine, are you sure? The cabin might be primitive, and it's the middle of winter. I grew up without indoor plumbing or central heating, Chlorine interrupted with a sniff. I think I can manage a few weeks in a cabin with both. Besides, she added, her voice softening as she looked at Ashen, he and I have a history. I think he'll be comfortable with me. It was settled. They would move Ashen that very night under cover of darkness and the still falling snow. Martha Donovan, who had been brought into the plan, would provide a decoy by driving Maribel's car to her own house, creating the impression that Maribel was visiting her. Meanwhile, Dr. Vey would drive Chlorine and Ashen to the cabin in his truck, which had four-wheel drive necessary for the snowy back roads. The hours until nightfall stretched endlessly. Maribel found herself jumping at every sound, half expecting Harker to appear at any moment, but the clinic remained quiet, with only a few routine appointments to distract her from her anxiety. Finally, as darkness settled over Millfield and the street lamps flickered to life, it was time. Maribel carefully transferred Ashen to a new carrier, one that Harker had never seen, while Dr. Vey brought his truck around to the back entrance of the clinic. Ready? He asked, appearing in the doorway, snow melting on his shoulders. Maribel nodded, her heart pounding. She bent to speak to Ashen through the carrier door. You're going on a little trip, she told him softly. Chlorine will take good care of you until it's safe to come back. The cat blinked at her, those amber eyes somehow conveying understanding, or at least acceptance. Then, as she watched, he turned his attention to Chlorine, who had approached to take the carrier. "Hello, old friend," the older woman said, her voice warm with affection. "Looks like we'll be roommates for a while." The drive to the cabin was tense and slow. Snow continued to fall, reducing visibility and making the roads treacherous. Dr. Vey drove with intense concentration, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. In the back seat, Chlorine kept up a quiet monologue to Ashen, telling him about the cabin and the woods surrounding it, as if preparing him for his temporary home. "There's a big window in the living room where you can watch the birds," she was saying, as they finally turned onto a narrow, unmarked road that disappeared into the dense forest. "And a wood stove that keeps the whole place cozy." The cabin, when they reached it, was indeed isolated, a sturdy structure of logs and stone that seemed to grow naturally from the snowy landscape. Dr. Vey used his key to unlock the door, then hurried inside to start the generator and turn on the heat while Maribel helped Chlorine carry in their supplies. The interior was rustic but comfortable, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and simple, sturdy furniture arranged for conversation and relaxation. The scent of pine permeated everything, mingling with the faint mustiness of a place closed up for months. "It'll warm up quickly once we get a fire going," Dr. Vey assured them, already kneeling at the fireplace with kindling and logs. Maribel set Ashen's carrier down and opened the door, unsure how he would react to the new environment. To her surprise, he emerged cautiously but without fear, his nose working as he took in the unfamiliar scents. After a moment's exploration, he approached the fireplace where Dr. Vey was now coaxing flames to life, apparently drawn to the warmth. "He seems to like it," Chlorine observed, settling into an armchair with a sigh of satisfaction. "I think we'll do just fine here." They spent an hour getting everything organized, setting up Ashen's litter box, preparing a feeding station, making sure Chlorine knew which medications to give and when. Throughout it all, Ashen moved about the cabin with growing confidence, investigating corners and sniffing at furniture legs. Finally, it was time for Maribel and Dr. Vey to leave. The goodbyes were harder than Maribel had expected. She knelt to stroke Ashen's head one last time, fighting back tears. "We'll figure this out," she promised him. "Just stay safe." To Chlorine, she said, "Call us if you need anything. One of us will drive up every few days with supplies." The older woman nodded, her expression serene. "Don't worry about us, we'll be just fine. You focus on finding out what that man is really up to." The drive back to Millfield was quiet, both Maribel and Dr. Vey lost in their own thoughts. The snow had stopped, leaving the world blanketed in white that glowed faintly under the moonlight, now breaking through the clouds. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Maribel asked as they approached the town limits. Dr. Vey was silent for a long moment. "I don't know," he admitted finally, "but I know we couldn't have lived with ourselves if we'd handed Ashen over to Harker without being certain he'd be safe." The next few days established a new routine. Maribel and Dr. Vey maintained their normal schedules at the clinic, though both felt Ashen's absence keenly. They had placed a sign in the front window indicating that Ashen had been temporarily moved to a foster home to explain his disappearance to regular visitors. James Harker called on Monday, his voice pleasant but with an undercurrent of impatience. "I was wondering if you'd had a chance to review my application," he said when Maribel answered the clinic phone. "We're still in the process," she replied, keeping her voice neutral. "We had several applications come in around the same time." "I see," Harker said, the pause that followed somehow threatening in its emptiness. "And where is Ashen now? I stopped by yesterday, but he seems to have disappeared." Maribel's grip tightened on the phone. "He's with a foster family," she said, sticking to their prepared story. "We thought he'd do better in a home environment while we finalize the adoption process." "How considerate," Harker remarked, his tone making it clear he didn't believe her. "Well, I look forward to hearing your decision soon, very soon." The call left Maribel shaken. She relayed the conversation to Dr. Vey, who frowned deeply. "He's getting suspicious. We need to move faster on finding out what his real connection to Ashen might be." They had already begun investigating, with Martha Donovan using her contacts at regional newspapers to dig into the animal cruelty case connected to Harker's property. But information was scarce, and what they did find was inconclusive. Yes, cats had been rescued from deplorable conditions, but Harker had successfully distanced himself from any direct involvement, claiming he had no knowledge of what his tenant was doing. On Wednesday evening, Maribel drove to the cabin to check on Chlorine and Ashen, bringing fresh supplies and medications. The forest was eerily beautiful in winter, the trees laden with snow that sparkled in her headlights. As she approached the cabin, smoke rising from the chimney in a lazy spiral against the darkening sky, she felt some of her tension ease. Inside, she found a scene of surprising domesticity. Chlorine was sitting in the armchair by the fire, knitting something that looked like a small blanket, while Ashen lay on the hearthrug apparently asleep, but with one eye cracked open at the sound of the door. "How's everything going?" Maribel asked, setting down her bags of groceries and medical supplies. "Peaceful," Chlorine replied with a smile. "It's been years since I've had this much uninterrupted quiet, and Ashen has been a perfect gentleman, uses his litter box, doesn't scratch the furniture, keeps me company without being demanding." Maribel knelt to greet the cat, who had risen and stretched languorously before padding over to rub against her legs. "He looks good," she observed, noting the continued improvement in his coat and the alert brightness of his eyes. "He's been exploring the woods a bit," Chlorine told her. "I let him out for short periods when the weather's decent. He always comes back when I call." This surprised Maribel. "You're not worried he'll run off?" Chlorine shook her head. "Not at all. I think he knows he's safe here." She paused, her knitting needles stilling in her hands. "There's something I want to show you. It happened yesterday." She rose and went to a small desk in the corner, returning with a photograph. "I found this in one of the drawers. It's from the last family reunion Harlan's sister hosted here about 3 years ago." Maribel took the photo, studying the group of smiling people gathered on the cabin's porch. "What am I looking for?" "The background," Chlorine said, pointing. "Behind the people, at the edge of the woods." Maribel squinted, then felt her breath catch. There, half hidden by shadows but unmistakable, was a black cat watching the gathering from a distance. The image was blurry, but there was no mistaking those distinctive amber eyes. "Ashen was here before," she whispered, looking down at the cat who had settled at her feet. 3 years ago. "I showed him the picture," Chlorine said. "He stared at it for the longest time, then went to the window and looked out at exactly the spot where he's standing in that photo. Maribel, I think he remembers this place. It means something to him." Maribel's mind raced, trying to connect the pieces. "But how? Why would he be here and then in Columbus and then at your house in Millfield?" Chlorine shook her head. "I don't have all the answers, but I do know that cats are creatures of habit and territory. They remember places that are important to them, places where they've been safe or places where they've been hurt." They spent the evening discussing possibilities, with Ashen a silent presence beside them, occasionally looking up as if he understood their conversation, but couldn't contribute to it. When Maribel finally left, the moon was high, casting blue-white light across the snow that made the forest seem like something from a fairy tale. Back in Millfield, the situation was deteriorating. Harker had begun stopping by the clinic daily, his inquiries about Ashen becoming increasingly insistent. On Friday, he arrived just before closing time, his manner more aggressive than before. "I think I've been more than patient," he told Dr. Vey, who had come out to the reception area when Maribel signaled him. "It's been over a week since I submitted my application. Either approve it or give me a legitimate reason for declining." Dr. Vey maintained his professional demeanor, though Maribel could see the tension in his shoulders. "Mr. Harker, as I've explained, we have a thorough process for all adoptions. Ashen's case is particularly high profile, and we want to ensure he goes to the most suitable home." "And you don't think my home is suitable?" Harker challenged, his voice dangerously quiet. "I didn't say that," Dr. Vey replied evenly. "But we do have some follow-up questions about your previous experience with cats. Perhaps we could schedule a formal interview early next week." It was a delaying tactic, and all three of them knew it. Harker's eyes narrowed, but after a moment, he nodded curtly. "Monday morning, then, and I expect a decision immediately afterward." After he left, Maribel let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "What are we going to do? By Monday, we need to either give him Ashen or have a valid reason to refuse him." Dr. Vey ran a hand through his silver hair, his expression troubled. "We need more information about his connection to those cats in Columbus. There has to be something we're missing." That night, Maribel could barely sleep. She tossed and turned, her mind filled with fragments of the puzzle they were trying to solve. Ashen at the cabin 3 years ago. Ashen at Chlorine's house, watching her window. Ashen at death's door, knocking for help. What was the thread that connected these events? She was awakened from a fitful sleep by her phone ringing. The clock on her bedside table showed 6:32 a.m. It was Sarah, her voice high with excitement. "Maribel, You need to come to the clinic right away. You won't believe what's happened." 20 minutes later, Maribel rushed through the clinic's front door, her coat still unbuttoned and her hair hastily pulled back. She found Sarah and Dr. Vey in the reception area with a woman she didn't recognize, young, maybe in her early 30s, with short brown hair and nervous eyes. "This is Talia Morgan," Dr. Vey introduced her. "She used to work for James Harker." The woman nodded, her hands clutching a manila envelope. "I was his personal assistant for 3 years," she explained, "until I couldn't stand it anymore." "Talia saw the story about Ashen in the paper," Sarah added. She recognized Harker's name when there was a follow-up piece about potential adopters. "You know about the cats," Maribel said, suddenly understanding. "The ones in Columbus." Talia nodded, her expression grim. "I know everything, and it's much worse than what came out in the papers." She opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of documents. Harker wasn't just the landlord of that property. He was actively involved in the breeding operation. It was his idea, a way to make quick money by selling exotic hybrid cats to wealthy buyers. But the conditions were horrific, and when the animals got sick or didn't breed as expected, they were— She swallowed hard. They were disposed of. Maribel felt sick. And Ashen, he was different, Talia said, sorting through the papers until she found what she was looking for, a photograph of a sleek black cat with amber eyes. Unmistakably, a younger, healthier Ashen. He was one of the original breeding cats imported from somewhere in Eastern Europe. Harker was obsessed with him, called him his good luck charm. When the raid happened, most of the cats were accounted for, but a few escaped in the chaos. Ashen was one of them. "So he's been looking for him all this time?" Dr. Vey asked, his brow furrowed. Talia shook her head. "Not actively, no. Harker had other problems after the raid, legal issues, financial setbacks, but he never forgot about that cat. He has this superstitious idea that his luck turned bad when Ashen disappeared, when he saw the story in the paper with that distinctive photo of those amber eyes. I knew he would try to get him back." "Why are you telling us this now?" Maribel asked, though she was already immensely grateful for the information. Talia's expression hardened. "Because I've spent 3 years trying to forget the things I saw while working for that man. When I recognized that cat in the newspaper, all the memories came flooding back. I couldn't let Harker get his hands on him again, not after what he's been through." The pieces were finally falling into place. Ashen had escaped during the raid in Columbus. Somehow he had made his way to the cabin, perhaps following some instinct or memory from when he had first been brought to the country. From there, he had wandered to Millfield, where he had found Chlorine, a kind presence who gave him food and a safe place to observe from a distance. And then, when he was injured or ill, he had sought help at the clinic, drawn perhaps by the scent of other animals or some understanding that this was a place of healing. "This changes everything," Dr. Vey said, his voice filled with new resolve. "With this evidence, we have more than enough reason to deny Harker's application." "It's not that simple," Talia warned. "These documents were never part of the official investigation. I took them when I left. Harker's lawyers would tear them apart, and he could come after all of us for defamation." Maribel's heart sank. They were so close to understanding the full story, yet still seemed trapped by Harker's power and influence. It was Sarah who offered a new perspective. "What if we don't need to prove anything to Harker?" she suggested. "What if we just need to find Ashen a home so perfect, so obviously right, that even Harker couldn't object? Or at least, couldn't object without revealing his true connection to the cat?" The idea took root immediately. "A public adoption," Maribel elaborated, excitement building in her voice. "Something the whole town witnesses and supports. Harker wouldn't dare challenge it without exposing himself." "But who?" Dr. Vey asked. "Who would be the perfect home for Ashen?" The answer came to Maribel in a flash of clarity so complete, it felt like something she had always known. "Chlorine," she said simply. "It's always been Chlorine. He chose her once already, watching over her from her porch, and she's been there for him when he needed sanctuary." The plan took shape quickly. They would bring Ashen back from the cabin on Sunday. On Monday morning, when Harker arrived for his interview, they would inform him that Ashen had already been adopted in a special ceremony the previous day, attended by the mayor and other community leaders. The adoption would be a fait accompli, celebrated and endorsed by the entire town. "Will Chlorine agree?" Sarah asked. Maribel smiled, remembering the easy companionship she had witnessed between the elderly woman and the cat at the cabin. "I think she's already made her decision. We just need to make it official." As they finalized the details, Maribel felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Ashen's journey, from imported exotic to abused breeding cat, from escaped survivor to guardian presence on Chlorine's porch, from dying stray to beloved community symbol, was finally approaching its resolution. What they couldn't have anticipated was how Harker would respond to their plan, or the final challenge that awaited Ashen before he could truly come home. For even as they worked to secure his future, the past was racing to catch up with him one last time. Sunday dawned clear and cold, the kind of winter day that makes the air feel like crystal and turns breath to plumes of white vapor. Maribel drove to the cabin early, her car packed with everything they would need for the adoption ceremony. The forest was silent and still, the only movement the occasional shower of snow falling from branches as she passed beneath them. At the cabin, she found Chlorine and Ashen sharing breakfast, Chlorine with a bowl of oatmeal, Ashen with a small plate of the chicken she had cooked for him. The scene was so domestic, so natural, that Maribel hesitated to disturb them. "Good morning," she called softly from the doorway. "Are you two ready to come home?" Chlorine looked up with a smile that transformed her face, erasing years from her appearance. "We've been waiting for you," she said, rising to clear the dishes. "Though I must say these weeks here have been among the most peaceful I've had in years." Ashen approached Maribel, rubbing against her legs in greeting before returning to Chlorine's side, as if making his preference clear. "He's chosen you," Maribel observed. "I think he did a long time ago." Chlorine nodded, her expression softening as she looked down at the cat. "When he used to sit on my porch, watching my window. I always felt he was keeping an eye on me, not the other way around. After Harold died, my husband, the house was so empty. I think Ashen knew that somehow." They packed up quickly, Ashen watching from his carrier as they loaded the car. The drive back to Millfield was filled with conversation about the coming ceremony and what life would be like once Ashen was officially home with Chlorine. "We'll need to get you proper supplies," Maribel was saying as they approached the town limits. "A better litter box, some toys, maybe a cat tree by that big window in your living room." Chlorine chuckled. "You're talking as if he's a regular house cat. I'm not sure Ashen will ever be quite that conventional. I think he'll come and go as he pleases, but he'll always come back." As they drove down Main Street, Maribel noticed an unfamiliar black SUV parked outside the clinic. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. "That might be Harker," she said, her voice tense. "He's not supposed to be here until tomorrow." "Then let's not go to the clinic," Chlorine suggested calmly. "Take me straight home. We can call Harlan from there." Maribel nodded, making a turn that would take them to Chlorine's house on Maple Street. As they pulled into the driveway of the modest white-clappered home with its welcoming front porch, she felt a sense of rightness, as if they had completed an important circle. From his carrier in the back seat, Ashen made a small sound, not quite a meow, more like a chirp of recognition. "He knows where we are," Chlorine said softly. "He's home." Inside, the house was just as Maribel had imagined it would be, neat and comfortable, filled with the collected memories of a long life well lived. Photographs lined the walls, showing Chlorine and her late husband in younger days, along with children and grandchildren who had grown and scattered. Maribel placed Ashen's carrier on the living room floor and opened the door. He emerged cautiously, nose working as he took in the familiar and unfamiliar scents. Then, with the deliberate pace of a creature claiming territory, he began to explore, moving from room to room while Chlorine and Maribel watched. "I'll call Dr. Vey," Maribel said, pulling out her phone. "Let him know where we are." But before she could dial, her phone rang, Sarah's number flashing on the screen. "Maribel," Sarah's voice was tight with urgency. "Where are you? Harker is here and he's furious. He says he knows we've been hiding Ashen." Maribel's heart sank. "We're at Chlorine's house. How did he find out?" "I don't know, but he's threatening to call the police claiming theft of property. He says he has proof that Ashen belongs to him." Maribel glanced at Chlorine, who had clearly overheard and whose face had set in determined lines. "Tell Dr. Vey we're staying here," she instructed Sarah. "If Harker wants to bring this to a head, let him come to us." After ending the call, she explained the situation to Chlorine. "I'm sorry," she concluded. "This isn't how we planned it." The older woman shook her head, a steely glint in her eyes. "Perhaps it's better this way. Let him come here to my house where Ashen has chosen to be. Let him try to take him away in front of witnesses." They didn't have to wait long. Within 20 minutes, the sound of vehicles pulling up outside brought them both to the window. Dr. Vey's truck was there, and beside it, the black SUV Maribel had noticed at the clinic. As they watched, Dr. Vey emerged from his vehicle, followed by Sarah. From the SUV came James Harker, his face set in lines of cold fury, and behind him, to Maribel's surprise, Mayor Thompson. "He brought the mayor?" Maribel whispered, alarmed. Chlorine's expression remained calm. "Good," she said simply. "The more witnesses, the better." The doorbell rang, its cheerful chime at odds with the tension of the moment. Chlorine moved to answer it, her back straight, her chin high. Maribel quickly looked around for Ashen, relieved to see him sitting calmly on the windowsill, as if he had been expecting this confrontation. "Mrs. Dawes," Harker began as soon as the door opened, not waiting for a greeting. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Chlorine regarded him coolly. "I don't believe I have anything of yours, Mr. Harker, but please come in. All of you." She stepped aside, allowing the group to enter her living room. Dr. Vey caught Maribel's eye as he entered, giving her a subtle nod that she interpreted as reassurance. Sarah looked nervous, but determined, while Mayor Thompson seemed confused, as if she wasn't entirely sure why she had been brought into this situation. "Now," Chlorine said, closing the door and turning to face her unexpected guests, "perhaps someone would like to explain what this is all about." Harker's gaze had already found Ashen, who remained on the windowsill, watching the proceedings with those unblinking amber eyes. "That cat," he said, pointing, "is my property. He was stolen from me 3 years ago, and I have documentation to prove it." He pulled a folder from inside his coat and extracted several papers, which he thrust toward Mayor Thompson. "Import certificates, pedigree documentation, veterinary records, all with identifying markers that match this animal. I've been searching for him for years and I want him returned immediately." The mayor looked uncomfortable as she glanced through the papers. "These do appear to be in order," she said reluctantly. "Mr. Harker came to my office this morning with these documents and a concerning story about how his valuable breeding cat had been essentially kidnapped by the clinic staff." "That's absurd," Dr. Vey interjected. "Ashen came to us as a stray at death's door. If he belonged to anyone, they had clearly abandoned him to his fate." "A convenient story," Harker sneered. "But the fact remains that you've been hiding him from me since I expressed interest in adopting him. Why would you do that, unless you knew I had a legitimate claim?" The room fell silent. Maribel could feel the weight of accusation hanging in the air, the careful plan they had constructed now in tatters. Harker's documentation, legitimate or not, gave him a legal standing they hadn't anticipated. It was Chlorine who broke the silence, her voice calm but carrying an authority that commanded attention. "Mr. Harker, I'd like to tell you a story. About 3 years ago, I began to notice a black cat on my porch in the evenings. He never came close enough for me to touch him, but he would sit there for hours watching my window. This continued for months. Then, about 9 weeks ago, he disappeared. When I next heard about him, he was at the veterinary clinic, having knocked on their door for help." She moved to stand beside Ashen, who had remained perfectly still throughout the confrontation. "This cat has chosen where he wants to be. Not with you, not even at the clinic, but here with me. Whatever documents you have, whatever claim you think you can make, you cannot deny that he has made his choice clear." Harker's expression hardened. "Sentimentality doesn't change ownership, Mrs. Dawes. That cat is worth thousands of dollars as a breeding animal. He's not some common stray who gets to choose where he lives." "Perhaps not," came a new voice from the doorway, "but his testimony might still be worth something." Everyone turned to see Talia Morgan standing there, a thick folder in her hands and 2 uniformed police officers beside her. "What is this?" Harker demanded, his composure slipping for the first time. "This," Talia replied, stepping into the room, "is the rest of the story. The parts you left out of those fancy documents." She handed her folder to Mayor Thompson. "Breeding license violations, animal cruelty charges that were dropped due to technicalities, evidence that was suppressed during the investigation. It's all here, including photographs of the conditions those cats were kept in." The mayor's face grew increasingly troubled as she looked through the new documents. "Mr. Harker," she said finally, looking up at him, "these allegations are extremely serious." "They're also irrelevant to the ownership of that specific animal," Harker countered, though his confidence had visibly wavered. "Whatever business practices you may be questioning, the fact remains that the cat is legally mine." It was at this moment that Ashen, who had remained a silent observer until now, suddenly leaped down from the windowsill. With deliberate steps, he crossed the room, not toward Harker but toward Chlorine. He sat at her feet, then looked up at her and extended his paw, just as he had done with Narrell at the farmer's market. The gesture was so clear, so unmistakably communicative, that a hush fell over the room. Chlorine bent down and gently took the offered paw in her hand, a silent pact witnessed by everyone present. "I think," Mayor Thompson said into the silence, "that we have a more complex situation than simple property law can address. Mr. Harker, while your documentation may establish original ownership, these new allegations cast serious doubt on your fitness as an owner, and the cat's own preference is rather dramatically clear." Harker looked from face to face, seemingly realizing that the tide had turned against him. His expression shifted from anger to calculation. "Perhaps we can reach a compromise," he suggested, his tone suddenly reasonable. "A financial settlement in exchange for relinquishing any claim to the animal. Say, $5,000. "I don't think so," Talia said firmly. "The officers aren't here just for moral support. They have some questions for you about those breeding operations, questions that the previous investigation never got to ask, because certain evidence wasn't available. Until those matters are resolved, I don't think you're in a position to be negotiating anything." The change in Harker was immediate and startling. The confident, commanding presence collapsed into something smaller and more desperate. "This is a setup," he sputtered, looking frantically around. "You can't—" "I have rights." "Yes, you do," one of the officers confirmed, stepping forward, "including the right to remain silent. We're not arresting you at this time, Mr. Harker, but we would like you to come down to the station to answer some questions." As the officers escorted a protesting Harker out to their patrol car, an almost palpable release of tension swept through the room. Maribel found herself shaking slightly with the aftermath of adrenaline, while Dr. Vey sank into a chair, looking suddenly tired but relieved. "Well," Mayor Thompson said, gathering up both sets of documents, "this has certainly been enlightening. Mrs. Dawes, I believe we still have the matter of an adoption to formalize." Chlorine, who had remained standing with quiet dignity throughout the confrontation, finally allowed herself a smile. "Yes, I believe we do." The adoption ceremony that followed was simpler than the one they had planned, but somehow more meaningful for having been forged in the fire of conflict. Mayor Thompson, in her official capacity, witnessed the signing of the papers. Dr. Vey provided documentation of Ashen's medical history since arriving at the clinic. Sarah took photographs to commemorate the occasion, and Ashen, the cat who had knocked at death's door and found not just healing but a home, moved through it all with the serene confidence of a creature who had finally come full circle. Later, as evening settled over Millfield and the excitement of the day began to fade, Maribel found herself sitting on Chlorine's porch, a cup of hot tea warming her hands. Inside, through the window, she could see Ashen curled up on the sofa beside his new official owner, both of them bathed in the golden light of a reading lamp. "Who would have thought," Dr. Vey mused, sitting in the rocking chair beside her, "that one stray cat could change so many lives?" Maribel smiled, watching the peaceful scene inside. "I don't think he was ever really a stray," she said softly, "just a traveler looking for the right home." The air was cold but still, with the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. From somewhere in the distance came the sound of church bells, their clear tones carrying across the quiet town. Millfield was settling into evening routines, lights coming on in windows, families gathering for dinner, the day's work giving way to rest. And on Maple Street, a cat who had once been at death's door now slept peacefully in the home he had chosen, surrounded by the community that had chosen to stand with him when it mattered most. His journey had come full circle, bringing healing not just to himself, but to all whose lives he had touched along the way. For in the end, that was the lesson Ashen had brought to Millfield, that sometimes the most profound courage is found in the simple act of asking for help, and the most transformative power lies in the willingness to answer that call, not just once, but again and again until healing is complete and home is finally found. 5 years had passed since that fateful winter when a black cat named Ashen had knocked on the door of the Millfield Veterinary Clinic. The small Ohio town had seen its share of changes during that time, some buildings renovated, a few new businesses opened, children grown taller, and elders grown a little grayer. Yet, through it all, the spirit of community that Ashen's journey had awakened remained as strong as ever. On a pleasant autumn afternoon, Maribel Quinn walked up the familiar path to Chlorine Dawes' house on Maple Street. At 52, Maribel's dark hair now had more silver streaks than 5 years ago, but her eyes remained bright and her step energetic. She carried a small wrapped package and a manila envelope tucked under her arm. The front porch of Chlorine's white clapboard house looked much the same as it always had, immaculately maintained, with potted chrysanthemums in autumn colors, adding splashes of gold and burgundy against the white railings. The only new addition was a custom-built cedar cat perch, positioned to catch the afternoon sun. Maribel smiled at the sight of the perch, knowing exactly who it was for. She knocked on the door, hearing the familiar chime echo inside. "Coming," called Chlorine's voice, still strong despite her now 83 years. The door opened to reveal Chlorine, her silver hair styled in the same neat bun she had worn for decades, though perhaps with a few more pins to keep it in place. Her face had more lines now, each one earned through years of smiles, concerns, and wisdom. "Right on time," Chlorine said warmly, stepping back to welcome Maribel inside. "He's been watching the clock, I swear." "He always knows," Maribel agreed, slipping off her light jacket. "Where is the man of the hour?" As if in answer, a sleek black shape appeared in the hallway. Ashen moved with the dignified grace of a cat in his prime, his coat glossy, and his amber eyes as bright and penetrating as ever. Though now estimated to be around 11 years old, he showed few signs of aging beyond a touch of grey around his muzzle. "There he is," Maribel said softly, kneeling to greet him. "Happy adoption anniversary, Ashen." The cat approached her, touching his nose briefly to her extended hand before walking to Chlorine and rubbing against her ankles with obvious affection. "He knows what day it is," Chlorine said, her voice filled with the pride of a parent. "He's been extra attentive all morning." The living room hadn't changed much over the years, though there were several additions that spoke to Ashen's presence: a handsome cat tree positioned by the bay window, a few well-chosen toys in a wicker basket, and most notably, an entire shelf of framed photographs featuring the famous feline in various settings and with different people. "Tea?" Chlorine offered, heading toward the kitchen. "That would be lovely," Maribel replied, setting her package down on the coffee table and taking a seat on the comfortable sofa. Ashen leapt up beside her, settling into the cushion with a contented look that seemed to say, "Yes, this is exactly where we all should be." As Chlorine prepared tea in the kitchen, the gentle clink of china and the whistle of the kettle creating a comforting backdrop, Maribel stroked Ashen's silky fur, marveling as she often did at the journey that had brought them all together. "You have no idea how many lives you've changed, do you?" she murmured to the cat, who blinked slowly at her in what she had long ago accepted as his way of saying he understood perfectly well. Chlorine returned with a tray bearing an elegant china teapot, cups and a plate of cinnamon cookies that filled the room with their spicy aroma. "Martha Donovan dropped these off this morning," she explained, setting the tray on the coffee table. "Said they were Ashen's favorite, though I don't recall him ever eating one." Maribel laughed. "I think she means they're your favorite, and she knows the way to get to you is through him." "Well, she's not wrong," Chlorine admitted with a smile, pouring the fragrant tea into delicate cups. The warm scent of Earl Grey mingled with the cinnamon, creating an atmosphere of comfort and celebration. As they settled in with their tea, Maribel reached for the package she had brought. "I have something for you, both of you actually." Chlorine accepted the neatly wrapped gift, her expression curious. "You didn't have to bring anything. Just having you here to mark the day is gift enough." "Open it," Maribel encouraged her, watching as Ashen perked up, his attention drawn to the rustling paper as Chlorine carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound book. Chlorine's eyes widened as she read the embossed title, "The Cat Who Knocked Ashen's Legacy." "Oh my," she breathed, opening the cover with reverent hands. Inside were page after page of photographs, newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, and printed stories. A complete chronicle of Ashen's journey and the impact he had made on Millfield. "It's a community project," Maribel explained. "Everyone contributed something. Photos, memories, stories about how Ashen touched their lives. Dr. Ave helped me compile it all." Chlorine turned the pages slowly, her eyes misting as she took in the breadth of Ashen's influence. There was the original photograph from the farmer's market, showing Ashen reaching out to touch young Narrell Finn's hand. There were clippings from the Millfield Gazette chronicling the fundraiser auction, the storm that had left the town without power, and the dramatic confrontation with James Harker. "I had no idea you were working on this," Chlorine said, her voice thick with emotion. "We wanted it to be a surprise." "There's more," Maribel added, handing over the manila envelope she had brought. "These just came in." Chlorine opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of official-looking documents. As she read through them, her expression changed from curiosity to astonishment. "The Ashen Foundation has been granted full non-profit status," she read aloud. "Effective immediately, All operations of the Community Animal Welfare Fund will fall under this new organizational structure. She looked up at Maribel, her eyes wide. This is really happening? The foundation we talked about? Maribel nodded, unable to contain her excitement any longer. It's official as of last week. The Ashen Foundation will coordinate all the animal welfare work we've been doing informally for the past 5 years. The Emergency Medical Fund, the Spay and Neuter program, the education initiatives in schools. We even have our first major donor committed to matching community contributions up to $50,000. That's incredible, Chlorine stammered, clearly overwhelmed. From one cat knocking on a door to an entire foundation. Who would have thought? As if aware that he was the topic of conversation, Ashen stretched languidly on the sofa cushion, then settled back into a comfortable loaf position, his paws tucked neatly beneath him and his amber eyes half closed in contentment. He certainly looks pleased with himself, Maribel observed with a chuckle. As well he should be, Chlorine replied, reaching over to stroke his head. But tell me more about the foundation. Who's going to run it? Where will it be based? Maribel sipped her tea, her eyes twinkling with excitement. Well, Dr. Vey has agreed to serve as the medical director. Sarah, you remember Sarah, his assistant? She's going to handle the day-to-day operations. Martha Donovan and the mayor are on the board of directors. And as for where... She hesitated, suddenly looking a bit nervous. That's actually something I wanted to discuss with you. Chlorine raised an eyebrow, waiting for Maribel to continue. The old Wilson property on Oak Street has been vacant for years, Maribel explained. The foundation has the opportunity to purchase it at a greatly reduced price. It's perfect. Central location, plenty of space for offices, and eventually a small shelter facility. A nice yard for events, but she took a deep breath. The board feels strongly that we need someone with wisdom and community standing to serve as the foundation's chairperson. Someone who embodies the spirit of compassion and connection that Ashen brought to Millfield. Understanding dawned on Chlorine's face. You want me to chair the foundation. You and Ashen as a package deal, Maribel confirmed. His story is what inspired all of this, but your wisdom is what will guide it forward. What do you say? Chlorine was quiet for a moment, absently stroking Ashen as she considered the proposal. Finally, she looked up with a determined gleam in her eye. I say yes with one condition. Name it, Maribel responded without hesitation. The Wilson house has that wonderful wraparound porch. I want a dedicated space there for Ashen, a spot where he can watch over everything, just like he used to do from my porch before he came to live with me. Maribel laughed, relief and joy mingling in the sound. I think that can be arranged. In fact, I'd say it's essential to the foundation's character. They spent the next hour discussing plans for the foundation, their conversation punctuated by the occasional comment from Ashen in the form of a meaningful look or a flick of his tail. As the afternoon light began to soften, casting a golden glow through the bay window, Chlorine suddenly remembered something. Oh, I nearly forgot to tell you. Narrell Finn stopped by yesterday. You wouldn't recognize him now, such a tall young man at 13. He brought Ashen a gift. She rose and went to a drawer in the side table, returning with a small handmade wooden plaque. She handed it to Maribel with a smile. The plaque was beautifully crafted, with Ashen's name burned into the wood and a simple but elegant carving of a cat's paw raised as if knocking. Beneath the name were the words, "Sometimes courage is just asking for help when you need it most." He made this himself in woodshop class, Chlorine explained. Said he wanted Ashen to know he's never forgotten that day at the farmer's market. Maribel ran her fingers over the carefully worked wood, touched by the sentiment. He's not the only one who remembers. So many lives change because of one small act. One cat gathering the courage to knock on a door. Speaking of changes, Chlorine said, setting her teacup down, how is Dr. Vey adjusting to semi-retirement? Maribel smiled. Better than he expected, I think. Having Dr. Jenkins take over most of the day-to-day operations has given him time to focus on the special cases he really cares about. And the teaching role at the Community College Veterinary Tech program suits him perfectly. And what about you? Chlorine asked perceptively. Any regrets about leaving the clinic to manage the foundation full-time? Maribel shook her head without hesitation. None whatsoever. 25 years as a veterinary receptionist was rewarding, but this feels like what I was meant to do all along. So I just needed a certain cat to show me the way. As if on cue, Ashen stood up, stretched, and jumped down from the sofa. He padded across the room to the window, where the late afternoon sun slanted through the glass, creating a warm patch of light on the floor. He settled into it with obvious pleasure, his black fur taking on a burnished glow in the golden light. He still does that every day at this time, Chlorine observed fondly. It's like he has an internal clock. No matter what he's doing, at exactly 4:30, he finds his sunbeam. The sight reminded Maribel of something. Did I ever tell you what happened with James Harker? After everything, I mean. Chlorine shook her head. I know there was some legal trouble for him after Talia provided all that evidence, but I never heard the final outcome. He served 6 months for animal cruelty charges that couldn't be dismissed this time, Maribel told her. Not nearly enough, in my opinion, but at least there was some justice. More importantly, his reputation and business were ruined. Last I heard, he had moved to Florida to try to start over. And Talia? The brave young woman who finally stood up to him? Maribel smiled. She's working with an animal rights organization in Columbus now. She visits occasionally when they have events in this area. Says helping animals is her way of making amends for the years she spent looking the other way. The conversation drifted then to other updates about the townspeople whose lives had intersected with Ashen's remarkable story. Frank Willis, once skeptical about all the fuss over a cat, had become one of the most reliable volunteers for the Foundation's programs, particularly enjoying his role in bringing therapy animals to visit seniors at the Millfield retirement home. Martha Donovan had created a special Ashen cookie at her bakery, ginger and cinnamon with a touch of molasses, with proceeds benefiting the Foundation. Even Gary Peterson, the health department official who had initially questioned the resources devoted to Ashen's care, had come around. His own daughter had adopted a rescue dog through one of the Foundation's events, and the transformation in the formerly shy child had converted him into a passionate advocate for animal-assisted therapy. It's amazing how far the ripples have spread, Chlorine reflected, refilling their teacups. All from that one moment when Maribel looked up and saw a cat tapping at the glass. I've thought about that moment so many times, Maribel admitted. What if I hadn't looked up just then? What if I'd assumed it was just a branch against the window? The entire course of so many lives might have been different. But you did look up, Chlorine said gently. Some things are meant to be, I think. Ashen was meant to find his way to that door, and you were meant to answer it. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling up outside. A moment later, a knock at the door announced another visitor. That'll be Dr. Vey, Maribel said, checking her watch. He mentioned he might stop by on his way home from the college. Chlorine rose to answer the door, returning moments later with Dr. Harlan Vey. At 67, his silver hair was now completely white, and he moved a bit more slowly than he once had, but his blue eyes were as sharp and kind as ever. He carried a small bag from the veterinary supply store. Ladies, he greeted them warmly, then spotted Ashen in his sunbeam. And there's the guest of honor. Happy anniversary, old friend. Ashen opened one eye to acknowledge Dr. Vey's presence, then closed it again, apparently unwilling to abandon his comfortable spot. Some things never change, Dr. Vey observed with a chuckle, taking a seat in the armchair across from the sofa. Still the most self-possessed cat I've ever met. He has every right to be, Chlorine said proudly. Maribel was just showing me the book you all put together. It's wonderful, Harlan. Thank you. It was a labor of love, he replied, accepting the cup of tea she offered him, though gathering all those stories and photographs was quite the undertaking. Did Maribel tell you about the Foundation's new status? She did indeed. It seems I'm to be the chairperson. Dr. Vey's face broke into a broad smile. Excellent. I was hoping you'd accept. The board was unanimous in wanting you for the position. As they discussed the Foundation's plans, Ashen finally abandoned his sunbeam and moved to investigate the bag Dr. Vey had brought. He sniffed at it curiously, then looked up at the veterinarian with what could only be described as expectation. Yes, I brought you something, Dr. Vey admitted, reaching into the bag. Though how you always know is beyond me. He pulled out a small package wrapped in tissue paper and set it on the floor. With delicate precision, Ashen used his paw to remove the paper, revealing a new collar made of supple leather with a small silver medallion attached. The medallion was engraved with his name, and beneath it a tiny raised paw. It seemed appropriate for the honorary mascot of the Foundation, Dr. Vey explained, as Ashen examined his gift. It's perfect, Chlorine said, watching as Ashen nudged the collar approvingly, though he rarely wears one. Seems to consider them beneath his dignity most days. This one is special, Dr. Vey told her. Look at the back of the medallion. Chlorine picked up the collar and turned the medallion over. There, engraved in tiny letters, were the words, "Every knock deserves an answer." That's to be the Foundation's motto, Maribel explained, her eyes bright with emotion. A reminder of how it all began. The three of them sat together as evening began to settle over Millfield, sharing memories and plans for the future, while Ashen moved between them, accepting their affection as his due. When Dr. Vey finally rose to leave, promising to bring the architectural plans for the foundation building the next day, the shadows had lengthened and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. "I should be going too," Maribel said, gathering her things. "Big day tomorrow with the real estate agent." At the door, Chlorine hugged them both. "Thank you for making this anniversary so special, and for believing in what Ashen started 5 years ago." "He made it easy to believe," Dr. Vey replied simply. "Some animals just have that special something, that spark of connection that reminds us why the bond between humans and animals matters so much." After they left, Chlorine returned to the living room to find Ashen sitting by the window, looking out at the quiet street where lamps were beginning to illuminate the gathering dusk. She joined him there, following his gaze to the familiar neighborhood she had known for most of her life. "Quite a day, wasn't it?" she said softly, stroking his sleek back. "A foundation named after you. A whole community changed because you had the courage to ask for help." Ashen looked up at her, those remarkable amber eyes reflecting the last light of day. Then, in a gesture that still had the power to move her after all these years, he raised his paw and gently placed it on her hand. "Yes, I know," she whispered, understanding the message as clearly as if he had spoken. "We helped each other, didn't we? That's what it's all about in the end." Later that evening, as Chlorine prepared for bed, she found Ashen already settled on his favorite pillow, watching her with his customary attentiveness. The new collar lay on the bedside table, perhaps to be worn on special occasions, but not a necessity for everyday life. "Big changes coming," she told him, as she turned out the light. "But some things will always stay the same." In the darkness, she felt him shift position, moving to curl up against her side as he did every night. A warm, comforting presence and a reminder of the unexpected blessings that can arrive when we open our doors to those in need. The Ashen Foundation's official opening took place 6 months later, on a perfect spring day, when the trees along Oak Street were alive with new leaves and the gardens of Millfield were bursting with color. The old Wilson house had been transformed, freshly painted in dignified gray with white trim, the wraparound porch restored to its former glory, and a discreet sign near the entrance bearing the foundation's name and motto. A sizable crowd had gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Practically the entire town was there, from Mayor Thompson and the town council members to families with children and seniors from the retirement home. Narl Finn, now 14 and towering over his mother, stood proudly beside the podium, the program listing him as the foundation's first youth ambassador. Chlorine Dawes, elegant in a blue dress that matched her eyes, prepared to address the gathering. Beside her on the podium, in a specially constructed perch that elevated him to just the right height, sat Ashen. For this most special occasion, he wore his leather collar with the silver medallion glinting in the spring sunshine. As Chlorine began to speak, a hush fell over the crowd. 5 years ago, she said, her voice strong and clear, a cat at death's door knocked at the clinic here in Millfield. What happened next surprised us all. She went on to recount Ashen's journey, his desperate plea for help, the community that came together to save him, the challenges they faced, and the transformation that had occurred along the way. As she spoke, many in the audience nodded in recognition, having played their own parts in the story. "Today," she continued, "we formalize what began with that single act of courage. The Ashen Foundation will stand as a testament to what can happen when we answer the knock at our door, when we respond to need with compassion, to suffering with healing, to isolation with community." Maribel, standing nearby with Dr. Vey, felt tears prick her eyes as she watched the woman who had become not just a friend, but an inspiration. Behind them, the foundation building stood ready, its front office where applications would be processed, its conference room where educational programs would be planned, its sunny back room already set up as a temporary shelter for animals in transition. "Each of us has the power to answer the knock," Chlorine was saying, her gaze sweeping across the gathered faces. "Each of us can be the one who opens the door when someone, human or animal, reaches out in need. That is the legacy of Ashen's journey and the mission of this foundation." As she finished speaking, Ashen rose from his perch and stepped forward, seeming to survey the crowd with those wise amber eyes. A murmur of appreciation ran through the audience at this perfectly timed gesture. "And now," Chlorine announced with a smile, "I believe our founder would like to officially open the doors of his foundation. It had been Narl's idea, inspired by the original story, A special ribbon stretched across the porch steps, positioned at just the right height for a cat's paw to touch it. A hush fell over the crowd as Ashen approached the ribbon, paused for a dramatic moment that made several people chuckle, and then deliberately raised his paw to tap the ribbon. The specially designed mechanism released at his touch, allowing the ribbon to separate and fall away. The doors of the Ashen Foundation were officially open. Cheers and applause erupted from the gathered crowd. Photographers from the Millfield Gazette and even a regional newspaper captured the moment. Ashen, his mission accomplished, returned to Chlorine's side with the dignified air of a public figure who had performed his duty. The celebration continued throughout the afternoon. Tours of the foundation building, refreshments on the lawn, and an impromptu adoption event that found homes for 6 cats and 3 dogs from the county shelter. Children played games organized by the youth volunteers. Seniors shared stories of their own beloved pets over punch and cookies, and community members signed up for various volunteer opportunities. As the event wound down, Maribel found herself standing on the porch with Chlorine and Ashen, watching as the last few visitors departed. "I'd say that was a success," Maribel observed, her voice satisfied. "Beyond anything I could have imagined," Chlorine agreed. "Did you see how many volunteer forms were filled out? We'll have more help than we know what to do with." Ashen, who had spent most of the afternoon in his designated porch spot, a comfortable cat bed positioned to allow him a view of all the proceedings, stretched and yawned, apparently ready to return home after his public appearance. "I think our chairman is ready to call it a day," Maribel laughed, watching as he stood and gave her an expectant look. "Can't blame him," Chlorine said, gathering her things. "It's been quite an afternoon, but a fitting culmination to his journey, don't you think?" As they prepared to leave, Dr. Vey joined them on the porch, his expression thoughtful as he gazed out at the town spread before them, the church steeple visible above the trees, the town square with its gazebo, the familiar streets where neighbors had become friends and friends had become family. "You know," he said reflectively, "in 35 years of veterinary practice, I've treated thousands of animals, but only one of them started a foundation and changed an entire community. He is rather special," Chlorine agreed, looking down at Ashen with undisguised affection. "It's more than that," Dr. Vey continued. "He reminded us of something we'd forgotten, that we're all connected, that what happens to the least among us affects us all, that compassion isn't just a feeling, but a choice we make every day." Maribel nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "A choice to answer the knock," she added softly. As they stood there in the golden light of late afternoon, Ashen suddenly lifted his head, his attention caught by something in the distance. Following his gaze, they saw a small figure approaching along the sidewalk, a child walking alone, head down, shoulders slumped in what looked like dejection. Without hesitation, Ashen descended the porch steps and moved to the edge of the property, sitting tall and visible as the child drew nearer. As the boy, for they could see now it was a young boy of perhaps 10, approached, he looked up and noticed the cat watching him. He stopped, surprise registering on his tear-stained face. Slowly, cautiously, Ashen extended his paw in greeting, just as he had done with Neril years ago. The boy's expression transformed, wonder replacing sadness as he carefully reached out to touch the offered paw. "Hello," they heard him say, his voice carrying in the quiet afternoon air. Chlorine and Maribel exchanged glances, a wordless understanding passing between them. Without discussion, they moved down the steps to where Ashen and the boy were engaged in their silent communication. "He doesn't do that with just anyone," Chlorine told the child gently. "You must be someone special." The boy looked up, startled to find himself addressed by strangers. I was just walking home," he stammered. "I had a bad day at school." "Well, this is Ashen," Maribel explained, gesturing to the cat who remained attentively focused on the boy, "and he has a way of finding people who need a friend. Would you like to come inside for a cookie?" Chlorine invited, her intuition telling her this child needed exactly what the foundation had been created to provide, a place where connections could be made and healing could begin. "We were just about to have some ourselves, and I think Ashen would like you to join us." The boy hesitated, then nodded shyly. "Okay, if he wants me to." As they all turned toward the foundation building, Dr. Vey, Maribel, Chlorine, Ashen, and their new young friend, the last rays of sun caught the silver medallion on Ashen's collar, making it gleam like a beacon in the fading light. "Every knock deserves an answer," the engraving proclaimed. And in Millfield, thanks to one remarkable cat and the community he had transformed, that promise would continue to be fulfilled for many years to come.